We're already 5 minutes late, but we have, I guess, a lot of pizza, and I'm happy that you are partaking. My original plan was to give a sermon last Friday about the issue because that was the right thing to do. But then, in the afternoon of Friday, I realized that there is no way in the world that I can do justice to this topic, speaking about it for about 12 to 14 minutes, which is normally the time that I like to allocate to a sermon, except of the high holidays. Because one of my arguments is that we, on all sides, miss the nuances. You know, it's very easy to say these are a bunch of anti-Semites and self-hating Jews, and that's it. Or the other ones, you know, these are the oppressors. What is really important in understanding what's happening today in at the campuses, and it didn't start today, it started a day after October 7th, has so many dimensions, and that's what I would like to explore today. I'm not going to give you a sermon denouncing all these people and telling you what we should do with them and put them in jail or whatever. It's nice to say, it may make us feel righteous for a few minutes, but it won't help us to understand the core of the issue. Because what I try to understand starting October 8th is how come so many people, especially super smart people, took the side of Hamas. Now, I read a lot recently, and people say, oh, of course, now the students take the side of Hamas because 207 days or so after the beginning, there are 34,000 dead Palestinians. Most of them are children and women. Of course, they're angry. But those of us who really paid attention realized that it started from the very beginning. People heard, back then we thought about something like 1,400 Israelis were massacred. Today the numbers are 1,200. 133 people were taken into captivities. Thousands were injured. And a day later, people thought, oh, we should blame Israel for that. Okay, so it didn't start 6 months later when people now see the toll of the Palestinians in Gaza, how many of them suffered, but it started immediately after. And we should understand, or at least try to understand why. Okay? So that's my main goal today. Let's listen to Russell Picard, and that's the only video I'm going to show you tonight.
What has Hamas done? Hamas has shifted the balance of power. Hamas has punctured the illusion of invincibility. That's what they've done. You don't have to be a Hamas supporter to recognize that. Hamas has changed the terms of debate. The Israeli officials are right. Nothing will be the same again. Nothing will be the same again. Hamas has challenged the monopoly of violence. And in those first few hours, even as horrific acts were being carried out, many of which we would not learn about until later, there are many Gazans of goodwill, many Palestinians of conscience, who abhor violence, as do you, as do I, who abhor the targeting of civilians, as do you, as do I, who were able to breathe. They were able to breathe for the first by this shifting of the balance of power, then they would not be human. I was exhilarated.
He was exhilarated. Now, you look at Russell Picard. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a professor of history at Cornell University. Got his PhD in history from Columbia. His book won many important prizes. Okay? So he's not just a stupid, uninformed, hateful person. He represents some very serious voices. A lot of them are in the academia. And he apologized later on because he was forced to, but we know that many people agree with him. He said it about a week later. I think something like the 21st, 22nd of October. Okay, so this is not 6.5 months later. Where did it come from? There are many answers that I will try to share with you tonight, but let's start with him, because this is interesting stuff, and those of you who want to study more are more than welcome. It's quite interesting even though it is disturbing. What Picard was talking about, it's a clear reference to the idea of decolonialism. Have you heard about it? Which is mainly associated with Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon was a French psychiatrist. He was born, he was in Martinique, and later on he was associated with the Algerian revolt. And he wrote 2 important books until he died at a very young age of 36 from cancer. So let me just read one paragraph from his book, Wretched of the Earth, and see how influential this book has been since the late 1950s. He writes, "Colonialism is not a thinking machine, nor a body endowed with reasoning faculties. It is violence in its natural state, and it only yields when confronted with greater violence." Okay, so the only way to react to colonialism is greater violence. Now, people who read actually the entire book and his other books see that it's more complex, but it seems like nobody read beyond the first chapter, in which he basically says, yes, those who are the oppressed should find the means of greater violence because that's the only way. And I found the quote that I was looking for, and he said, the individuals breathing, the oppressed, those who live under colonialist regime, so their breathing is an observed and occupied breathing. It is a combat breathing. So what Picard said, that now they were able finally to breathe, he referred directly to Fanon and said, yes, the Palestinians who employed this kind of violence are exhilarated because they can breathe. Finally, they were able to fight against the oppressor. Okay, so this, I know it's oversimplification of decolonialism. A lot is written about it, and you're welcome to learn more. But this is the major argument. The modern state of Israel is a colonial state. The Palestinians are decolonized, And therefore, it doesn't matter how the Palestinians revolt against Israel, it's all appropriate. Okay, that's really the pure distilled argument. Now you ask yourself, is Israel really a colonizer? Because when you think about colonialism, you really think of a state with only now has 9 million citizens. So how come Israel became the colonizer? Let me just read a little a little definition here that I really like from a British scholar, Montefiore. He says, Israel is an imperialist colonist force, that Israelis are settler colonialists, and that Palestinians have a right to eliminate their oppressors. I skip a little. The argument is that it is almost impossible for the oppressed to be themselves racist, just as it is impossible for an oppressor to be the subject of racism. Okay, so you cannot say that the Palestinians are racist. By the way, it was all taken from, a lot of it was taken from the struggle of the African Americans in this country, right? You can never say that the blacks are racist because they are the victims of slavery, etc., right? So the same thing is applied to Israel. So you cannot blame the Palestinians who are always the victims, correct? Jews, therefore, cannot suffer racism because they are regarded as white and privileged. Although they cannot be victims, they can exploit others, less privileged people, in the West through the sins of exploitative capitalism, and in the Middle East through colonialism. This particular, no, this is the definition, but this is what for the most part is taught in many of the best, most important universities in our country. So if you're asking yourself why these students are willing to be arrested, to be kicked out of these schools that it's almost impossible to get in, you start to understand. That's what they are learning, okay? This is the way with which they perceive the world around them. There are oppressors and they're oppressed. The oppressed can basically do no wrong, okay? Because, as we heard from Fanon, and of course he's not the only one who writes it, they, the colonialists, the oppressors, used and are still using force and violence against you, and therefore you must do the same, and no matter what you do is right. Okay? Again, apologize for simplifying it or oversimplifying it, but this is more or less in the background of a lot of these arguments. Okay? Now, let's, any question about it? Because it's a very important thing to understand. First of all, why wouldn't it be? You know, the academic freedom is very important. And if that's the way that is considered to be the intellectual way today, why not? Now, I don't want you to understand that professors at Columbia and Yale are standing on the podium and call for Hamas to kill Israeli civilians, right? They talk about these big theories. And they're mainly talking about the past. They're talking about England and how it colonized parts of Africa and the Middle East, and France and the United States, okay? That's the way that more or less they teach history, but you don't have to be a genius, and most of these kids are geniuses. I hate when people call them idiots. They're not. They're serious, thinking people, okay? And they apply it also to Israel, because Israel now occupies millions of Palestinians, right? And they make the leap from the way that the Fanon and others described what, for example, the French did in Algiers, to what the Israelis now are doing in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, Brian is raising his hand. Don't say Qatar at this point, if that's what you wanted to say. Okay.
The entire argument revolves around a Muslim privilege of the analysis.
I'll get to it. That's why I'm here, because my goal here is not to complain about the universities. It won't help us at all, but actually to give us the information that we can use to answer, to battle with these arguments, okay? I said don't mention Qatar. One of the answers is, at least, I did not check it myself, so I have to present it to you as it is, that a lot of money, definitely to Columbia University, came from countries like Qatar, and we're talking about billions of dollars. And when you get these wonderful grants, you know, even subconsciously, you want to please your donor. Okay, but this is too simplistic.
Yeah, I don't think
Just one second. People speak, and let's go ahead, Mark. Oh, okay. So this is one argument. Why is it wrong? Let me just give you a few small things here. Israel, according to the people who blames her or it to be colonialist, they said that Israelis are white and the Arabs are not. Now, I don't know if you have been to Israel, but about 60% of the Israelis today are not. They are descendants of people who were born in Arab countries. And they look much more like the Palestinians than like Western Europeans. Today, unfortunately, there was a funeral of one of the soldiers who got killed in Gaza, and he was Ethiopian. Okay, there is a large Ethiopian community in Israel that are not white-skinned. Okay, so to think about the Israelis as the white colonialists, it's simply wrong. And it's such factual that there is no argument about it. Okay, so if this theory says that the whites are the oppressors and the dark skin are the oppressed, and that's how they look at the Israelis, no, it's just not right. They say that Israel colonized the Gaza and the West Bank. I'll tell you, and do it whatever you want with it. I think that Israel, since 1967, did horrible things in the West Bank and Gaza, and still does. It made so many mistakes, so many things that it shouldn't have done. At the same time, this is not the argument that we hear a lot of genocide, and I will give you a few reasons why it is not. And I want you to know that Israel did not completely colonize, not even partially, Gaza. 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza. There were settlements in Gaza. You know what happened to all these Jewish settlements in Gaza? Okay, they took them out. They destroyed them. So there are no Jews living in Gaza. 2007, Hamas took over Gaza. You know how they did it? They killed the PLO people there, and with a lot of violence, became a one party that controls Gaza. Okay? So the ones that control Gaza today is not Israel. Now I want to put all the information at the table. Israel and Egypt together, not just Israel, laid a blockade over Gaza, and they control everything basically. Israel controls the water, Israel controls the electricity in Gaza. Israel controls a lot, but this does not fit the model of colonialism, because most of the control still is at the hands of the Hamas. All these arguments about genocide, it is true, and I strongly believe that we can and probably we should at the same time hold different feelings. I think we should really feel horrible for our sisters and brothers in Israel, for the suffering there, especially as we think about the hostages. It really keeps me up at night, because I am afraid that the current government is not doing all that they can and should to release the hostages. And every day in the Israeli papers, you read interviews with the parents, with the families, and I want to cry, as we read their stories. And Hamas knows what they're doing, because they released in the past week and a half, several videos of these hostages. And you look at them and you say, they're alive today. Will they be alive tomorrow? Just do something. Okay, so we feel horrible about Israel. We are worried about anti-Semitism in our country and outside of this country. And this is serious. Since October 7th, anti-Semitic incidents went up 400%. 400% in the last 6 months, okay? And when we listen to what's happening and when we watch what's happening in colleges, we know that the anti-Semitic trope is very loud. And at the same time, we can and should feel really horrible for the Palestinians. It doesn't matter if they brought it upon themselves somehow. But when there are 34,000 people who died, when you look at the pictures of their homes, more than half of these homes will never be used again. There is starvation there. Yes, we can be sad and feel bad for them. This is the Jewish way. On Passover, we reminded ourselves of this teaching when the people of Israel celebrated when the Egyptians were drowning in the sea, right? Remember the story? God opened up the sea, the Israelites passed, and then God closed the sea and all the Egyptians died. So the Israelites started to sing. What did God say? Shut up. He said, in Hebrew, it's my creatures, the people I created are dead, and you're singing? Never rejoice when your enemies die. Okay, this is a fundamental Jewish teaching. And we can hold that and at the same time hold our agony and our distress over what's happening in Israel and what's happening with regard to anti-Semitism. And I think that this is what we are expected to do. So I mentioned okay, let me just tell you something else historically. I think, Brian, that's what you were talking about. Israel, the people of Israel today are not the colonialists that some people want them to be. Almost all of them are refugees from Europe and from Arab countries. After the War of Independence, 1948, 700,000 Palestinians lost their homes. This is an Arab refugee problem. This is a huge number, 700,000. At the same time, 900,000 Jews were expelled from their countries, the Arab countries where they lived. And I see Leona here, who was kicked out of Egypt, but they were kicked out of Iraq, of Egypt, of Syria, of Iran. Okay, so all of a sudden, after the 48 war, yeah, there were 700,000 Palestinian refugees. Sad. There were 900,000 Jewish refugees. And I'm not even talking about the Holocaust. I'm just talking about the Jews who lived for more than 1,000 years, and in the case of Egypt, more than 2,000 years, in Arab countries, contributed a lot to their culture, to their economy, to their everything, and whoops, you're out of here. Something that very few people like to talk about. Most of them moved to Israel, and then Leona moved here. Okay? But this is something to remember. But it doesn't matter, it doesn't mean that we have to ignore the suffering of the Palestinian refugees. Perfectly fine. And at the same time, remember that 900,000 Jews also were misplaced. And without the state of Israel, they wouldn't have a place to go to. How did the whole thing start? It's really important to know, and I'm going to tell it in this context. After the First World War, the British Empire, England, got a mandate over Palestine. That was the name, okay? Those who gave the name Palestine were the Romans back then, okay? So when we say Palestine, the time between, let's say, in the 70 to 1948, that was the name of this land. It was not Israel. Nobody called it Israel. My grandparents called it Palestina. That was the name. Why did the Roman call it Palestine? Because they wanted everyone to think that this was the land of the Philistines, not the land of the Jews. Okay, so they changed the name completely. And that was the name for 2,000 years. Okay? In any case, the British had the mandate over that land, just like the French had the mandate over Syria and Lebanon and other areas. And at one point, they were supposed to decide what to do with it. And they came up, the British and then the UN, with the solution of dividing the land into two separate countries. One for the Arabs, one for the Jews, okay? The Jews agreed. There was a lot of criticism of Ben Gurion, who was the head of the Jewish yeshuv, of the Jewish settlement in the area. How dare you, we need everything, but he was extremely smart and said, you know what, sometimes you take what you are given and then you see how to continue. But just simply say no, we're just going to lose. And thank God we had Ben Gurion and not Netanyahu back then. So Ben Gurion said, yes, we'll take whatever you give us because we need desperately a Jewish state. What did the Arabs say? No. Either we get the whole thing or nothing. They ended up getting the nothing. Okay, in 1948, May 14th, 1948, Friday afternoon, when Ben Gurion and some other people gathered in a small, unimpressive, really, place in Tel Aviv. I don't know if any of you visited them. whenever we take a group there, we go to Heichal Ha'atzmaut, the Hall of Independence, really a room probably the size of this, right? It's nothing of a place. And they declared the foundation of Israel. What happened a second later? All the Arab countries started to attack Israel, as well as what today we call the Palestinians, right? The Arab citizens who live there. I don't know how, a lot of God's help, we won. We could have lost. I think the odds of losing were probably even greater than winning. Somehow we won. And because Israel was attacked, the Palestinians lost their state. So it's not just that Israel gained a state, they lost the first opportunity they had to have a Palestinian state. Okay, so all this talking about colonialism and no. We could have had two states starting 1948. Israel did not attack first. Okay? Later on, the Palestinians had other opportunities to get their state. And the last one, as we remember, with Yasser Arafat as their leader, the Israeli prime minister at the time was Ehud Barak, and they met here in the United States, and there was a plan according to which Israel agreed to return over 90% of the territories to the Palestinians. And everyone thought at the time that it was a done deal. And then Arafat came out and said, no. Okay, Golda Meir said that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It is quite true, okay? That said, I'm not saying that that's probably not the only solution to the problem, but so far, definitely now it's hard to see how things like that happen. Okay, so historically, it's not that somebody just oppressed these Palestinians. They had a fair chance in having their state, just like the Jews. Another argument that I hear a lot that is not accurate, they say that the Jews have no connection to the land. It's not true, because we know the Bible and we know our Jewish history. You know, this land was a Jewish state. At one point, it was actually two Jewish states, right? It was divided between Israel in the north and Judea in the south. But Jews lived there. And even after the year of 70, when the Romans exiled many of the Jews and destroyed the temple, there were always Jews in that country. And even the Jews outside of the country always prayed for and hoped for returning to this land. If you look at the prayer book, so many of these prayers talk about our desire to go back to our ancestral land. Okay, so people who say, there's really no connection, it's all now. No, it's not nonsense, it's real. It's real. And I'll tell you something else that many of you probably don't know. In the beginning, there were few Jews there, but mainly because of the pogroms in Russia from 1881 to 1920 and some other events and the emergence of the modern Zionist movement, more and more Jewish people immigrated to the land of Israel. Initially, the Arabs didn't mind. Some of them were happy. Why they were happy? Because their land was worth more money. All of a sudden, you have people who are willing to buy your land. So having a land that has very little value, all of a sudden you have this influx of new people who are willing to settle there, to buy land, to build factories, roads, right? So they liked it until they didn't, because too many Jews started to arrive, okay? That's when the British changed their mind about a Jewish state in Palestine. 1917, the British government, that's known as the Balfour Declaration, promised a Jewish state for the Jews in Palestine. But in the 1930s, the British changed their mind and supported the Arabs. You know why the Jews have a state? Not because the British handed it over to them, but because of the Jewish revolt from 1945 to 1948. It was the Haganah, as you know, it was the Etzel, it was all these Jewish rebels, or as some Israelis today call them, they were the terrorist groups. And Ehud Barak, the man I mentioned before, who was Israel's prime minister and by far the most decorated general in the history of Israel, said that if he today was a Palestinian, he would have been a terrorist, because he would have been fighting for independence the way that his predecessors, the Jews in Palestine, fought for their land. Okay, so the whole concept of this decolonialism with certainly regard to Israel doesn't hold a lot of water, and yet it's very popular, at least in many of the elite universities. Now, I'm saying it, again, not to criticize these universities, but for us to understand where our young students come from. That's what they read. And it's tempting, because in their mind, they are right now on the right side of history. And maybe some of you remember Vietnam, how tempting it was to be on the right side of history. I remember the apartheid in South Africa. I have to tell you, I was a good student, but I didn't study too much the history and the politics of South Africa. But I demonstrated, and it was very easy to know, oh, white people are bad, black people are good. Stop the apartheid. Okay, because when you're 20 or so, you want to be on the right side of history. So when this is the kind of literature, this is the picture of history that you are taught, you think that being on the side of the Palestinians, this is the right side. And for that, you're willing to get arrested. And even to lose your lucrative place at Columbia, Yale, and Harvard. So don't look down at these students. Now, I wanted to say it in the beginning, I'll say it again. It's easy to say that they're all anti-Semites. They're not. Some definitely are, and we'll talk about them. But many of them are not. They just think that they do the right thing, and that's why you see so many Jewish students among them. Did you see the pictures during the Seder of a major, big Seder at the encampment at Columbia University? Many Jewish people are there supporting the Palestinians. Why is that? Sorry? They do know their history. I mean, not all of them, obviously. They know. They know, but let me tell you something really important. I read an article, and I'm waiting for the book to arrive in my house. There is a new book that was written by Noah Feldman. He's at the Harvard Law faculty. He's a brilliant, super brilliant person. And he writes, the last book is not so much about the regular subject he writes about, but about Judaism. The original title of his book, he finished the first version of the book just before October 7th. And then he had to change it. And it just came out. But the first title of the book was, quote, "I'm a bad Jew." This is a line that I heard dozens of times from people. I'm a bad Jew, meaning I don't go to synagogue, I don't do that, I'm a bad Jew. It changed it. But he has an incredibly important explanation why so many Jewish students are part of these encampments. Said that most of the American Jews, the young ones, were taught and educated that, you know what, I'll ask you, what is the most important thing of Judaism today? Tikkun olam, social justice. We keep saying it, we keep teaching it. We do a lot of it, right? Tikkun olam, acts of tzedakah, repairing the world, social justice. This is our Judaism. Because, you know, all these rituals are maybe nice. Sometimes, you know, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they go to a synagogue. Sometimes they celebrate something. But when they think about their Jewishness, for the most part, it's related to social justice. And here they see a situation in which they see that the Israeli government mistreats the Palestinians. So for them to side with the Palestinians is not an act of self-hatred, just the opposite. This is the way that they practice their Judaism. This is the reason that they support BLM. This is the reason that the Jews are always at the front of any kind of demonstration and rally you want. If it's productive rights, if it's LGBTQ, if it's anything, because this is the Jewish identity. That's what makes me a Jew. And now I have an opportunity to practice my Judaism. So that's, and therefore many of them, if you looked at a lot of the pictures, they were even wearing a talit because they're real Jews. That's why they celebrated Passover Seder, because that's what they do. Okay, so please don't look down at them. Disagree with them. I'm not saying accept what they say, but we must understand where they're coming from, because these are our children and grandchildren. And if you want them to come for next Passover, or if you don't want to shake around the Passover Seder of fear of saying the wrong word, know where they're coming from. Okay, so this is a very important point. It's not because they're against Judaism. It's because they are devoted Jews in their way, the way of Tikkun Olam and social justice. It's a brilliant point of Feldman. Okay? God, no. But thank you for asking this question. I mean, Hamas are Palestinians. And you know what? I'll just use your question to clarify something even further. Hamas are definitely Palestinians, and supporting the Palestinian cause is completely legitimate. And many people can support Israel and the Palestinians. It doesn't have to be a contradiction. Supporting Hamas, in my opinion, is anti-Semitic. Okay, that's where I draw the line. So when we hear in these rallies and these demonstrations support for Hamas, and there are all these quotes that you saw, now, this is anti-Jewish. But to think that Israel should do more to solve the problem and to stop the settlement and many other things that Netanyahu's government is doing, it's a legitimate call.
How would you characterize the Palestinians who support?
Anyone who supports Hamas is anti-Semite, in my opinion. If you support an organization that massacred children, babies, innocent people, right? raped so many of them, still holding 133 of them. This is not resistance. This is terrorism. This is barbarism. This is brutality. And that's where I believe we should draw the line.
Some of the Palestinians still in Gaza do support it, which is why they're there.
This is a different thing. I don't want to go into it because I want to focus on the students and universities. Yes.
It's not bad to support the Palestinian cause. What is that cause? Palestinian cause. What's the defining characteristic of the Palestinian?
In my opinion, I believe that there should be a Palestinian state, and I just don't see a way to get it this way. When I was active and during 92 to 96, I believed it was a feasible way to go. Now, I don't really know, but I think that ultimately the Palestinians should have their own state and self-control of their territories, not being controlled by Ben Gvir. So that's the cause that two-state solution. God forbid one-state solution. That's my biggest nightmare. One-state solutions mean that ultimately Israel will be forced to give citizenship to the Arabs of the West Bank and Gaza, which are about over 4 million now, okay? Israel now, about over 20% of the Israelis, there are 9 million Israelis, over 20% of them are Arabs, okay? Mostly Muslims, okay? So if you give citizenship to the Palestinians of Gaza and the West Bank, plus the Arabs who live already in Israel and are citizens, they have the same passport that I have, they vote in the same elections that I do, okay? They have full rights as citizens. It will be the end of Israel as a Jewish state. There will be Israel, but it will look maybe like Lebanon or Syria. And I strongly believe that Israel should always be a Jewish state. We have only one. And I want to keep it. And one-state solution is not the way to go. I want to say a few other things because I want us all to understand more. Go back to these students. So Tikkun Olam is one of the things. Have you ever been to a Jewish museum in the United States? Washington, Miami, there are over 16 of them. They all have a very clear message. Not just to remember the Holocaust, what happened to us, to the Jews, but to make sure that something like that will never happen again to anyone. Okay, so I remember when I lived in New York, I took my youth group to Washington, D.C. For a huge rally about what happened in Rwanda at that time. Okay, and that was part, and then we visited the Jewish Museum, the Holocaust Museum in Washington. That was the charter of the museum. Never again does not only mean we, the Jews, will never be massacred again, but nobody should suffer the way we did. Some of these students, the Jewish students, were brought up on the Holocaust, and that teaching, they look at the Palestinians and said, oops, we have to make sure that they don't suffer the way we did. Okay? What I'm saying is not necessarily my personal opinion. I just tried to explain the mindset of these young people. I don't want any of you to discount their intelligence, to discount their commitment to Judaism. You can, but it's too easy and it won't get us anywhere. Okay? Try to understand where they're coming from and perhaps get some arguments against it. Okay? But understand them. Other thing that we should worry about, but that's the reality. Not only Jews, but in polls of young people between 18 and 29, the majority of them now sympathize with the Palestinians rather than with Israel. Over 65, it's completely different. Okay? So the young generation in America, not just the Jewish generation, just young people in America, now up to 30, okay, they sympathize with the Palestinians. And it's not going to change. Okay, not all of them, I'm talking about percentage, majority. It's not all of them. But until recently, the majority, even of the young people, sympathize with Israel because we were the victim. This is the generation who grew up remembering the Holocaust. And when we talk about the Jewish Americans, these are the people, and that's you, who remember 1967, Six-Day War, a real existential threat to Israel, and so much pride, so much quelling over the Israeli army, who was able to defeat all of them in 6 days. We grew up on 73, again, major risk to the survival of Israel, but Israel prevailed. Okay, so you have it. But the young people today, they were born, what, 2000? Late 1990s? The Holocaust was already something that belongs in history. Real history. For them, Israel is now a strong, vital, wealthy startup nation. It's not the kind of Israel that you remember. Okay? So for them, yeah, Israel can easily be associated with the oppressor, not the oppressed. So you see the shift of the young generation sympathize with the underdog, the Palestinians. The older generation still sympathize more with Israelis. But you know what's going to happen? This 30-year-old will be the current, the 65 plus, in 35 years or so. Okay, so it's really important to know. And another thing you must remember is that this generation, for the most part, and not everyone, but we're talking about statistics, where do they get the news from? TikTok, social media. I know for many of us, it's just inconceivable, right? I cannot even conceive getting my news from TV. I think it's an abomination. So I get it all from newspapers. But even TV, this is the way that most people over a certain age still get their news from. Just let me finish, please, because it's hard. No, I'm very emotional when I talk about it too. And so they get the news for the most part from social media that is biased against Israel. And you can either, I don't know, I wish I had the knowledge to tell you if it's really that somebody does it on purpose and tweaks the algorithm of TikTok and Facebook or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But when this is your source of media, there is much more pro-Palestinian opinions and bias than pro-Israel. Okay? And it's not that all these nice people today are going to listen to me. Okay, I'll stop watching TikTok and I'm going to read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times instead. That ain't gonna happen, okay? So these are important things. It might sound trivial to you, but it's really important. Let me just continue with a few more things that I wanted to be able to communicate to you. First of all, who are these people on the campuses who do all these encampments and all these pro-Palestinian things? So there are three main groups that I want you to start to get familiar with. One is the PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement. Sounds nice, right? Palestinian Youth Movement, that's a very nice youth group, JAMTI. But they are serious anti-Zionists. And in my opinion, and I know that many people today would not agree with me, especially those who are younger than 29. For me, anti-Zionist is the same as anti-Jewish. I understand sometimes the people are not, but the way I look at Zionism means the right of the Jewish people to have their own state. And anti-Zionism, the way I take it, and I know some people define it differently, I know, but the way I see it is being anti-Zionist is saying the Jewish people do not have the right for their own state. Okay? So I don't see this difference between these two, but be fair and be open-minded, because when some people tell you, I'm all for Judaism, but I'm anti-Zionist, you see at least where they're coming from. The fact that I disagree is different. So just to tell you something about this Palestinian youth movement, so one quote from their manifesto: salute our youth in the streets who continue to throw rocks, light Molotov cocktails, burn tires, etc. They're quite militants. Another group, this is the main group on campuses. These are the Students for Justice in Palestine. They're strong. They're quite big, okay? And what they want is to expel Zionists. They would not use the word Jews, of course, right? Because when you say expel Jews, this is anti-Semitic. They use the word Zionist, like if you're a supporter of Israel, it's okay to expel you, okay? And those are the people who normally protest outside of the Hillel houses, who gives a hard time to Jewish students, okay? Their response to October 7 was, I quote, historic win for Palestinian resistance, okay? And they have 200 chapters. This is not a small group, okay? We have to know who we are dealing with. One thing that is not directly related to them, but when I look at all these demonstrations, all these rallies, the thing that makes me so angry is those who cover their faces. If you believe in what you're saying and what you do, show your face. We'll have an argument, we'll have a debate. But don't cover your face. And I don't understand why universities even allow people to go inside covering their faces. Because you can have a mask. I mean, we all wore masks for years, right? But covering your face, this is not freedom of speech. This is a safety issue. And there's something extremely problematic again about it. And the last important group that I want to mention is Jewish Voices for Peace. Have you heard about them? So this is Jewish anti-Zionist group. And they are against basically the state of Israel. Okay, for example, there is a famous cartoon that they like to have of Israeli soldier drinking blood of a Palestinian. So if you go back to the Nazi propaganda, this is it's taken from their books. Okay, this is, I quote, the root cause of the violence of October 7 was Israel. Now, they're not so big, they have 12 chapters, but they make me cringe, if not cry, because these are our people. And it is true, there are some not Jewish people or part of them, but they're Jewish. So it's one thing to be a committed Jew and support the Palestinians, that's fine, but they're against Israel. Okay, they cannot not hold Israel and the Palestinians at the same time. They look at it as either or. And that's a very sad thing that, Wendy? Who finances all these groups? Who do you think? Qatar is giving tremendous amount of money, and there is a big difference I read. Again, I'm not a forensic accountant. I don't really know, but from what I read, there is the declared donations to universities and other organizations, and there is the real money that they give. And this is big. This is big. And I'm sure they get other donations from others, because many people think that being on the side of the Palestinians is being on the right side of history, and they want to support these causes. Yeah.
You think that Hamas because those who cover their face don't want to be identified. So I was wondering whether or not, there's involved.
I don't think that Hamas has the power now to be directly involved, but obviously Hamas energizes them. And that's why I wanted to start with Picard's wars. It made them exhilarated to see the Palestinians, to see them revolting, resisting. Okay, they don't like words like terrorism, like killing, like massacre. These are bad words. They like the words of resistance, right? Because resistance is a just thing to do. You're oppressed and you resist. So of course they are influenced by that. But I don't believe that Hamas right now can help any cause directly in any meaningful way. But the people behind them, like the Qataris, who likes to go around the world with suitcases full of money and help different causes. Any comment? Any, Debbie? Oh. So let me clarify. What I said about Tikkun Olam and social justice, I referred specifically to the Jewish students, not the others. Others are not my problem. But the Jewish students think that they should look at their home first, at their own country, Israel, okay? And criticize Israel first, because that's their Jewish state. And they have no reason or no hold of the other Arab countries. By the way, that's part of the reasons. We can talk for an hour about all the reasons that the Palestinians are where they are today, but they're definitely abandoned by all these 20 Arab countries that you mentioned. They use them. Iran, we saw how beautifully Iran uses them as a pawn in their war, but nobody really cares about them. Okay? They have no oil, but that's a different thing. Yes? So a lot of articles in the kind of magazines that I read talked about how not to talk about it during the Seder. Okay? But I think that maybe it's a Seder is not the best time to talk about it, but having so many taboos, it's very hard to have serious relationship. And we really have to learn, because I know that as a society, we lost our ability to disagree and still to respect each other. And it's not just parents and children or family members. We know what happens with politics, right? And sometimes we agree to not to talk about it. But with our own families, with our own children, I'll tell you what I do. I want to listen. And I try to be as open-minded as I can. But I can also tell you that I know my biases. I'm an Israeli. I served in the army. I'm a third generation of Holocaust survivors. So you can bring me all the arguments in the world. Israel is my place. And one time when my daughter had a fight with a friend, it was in middle school, I remember. She thought that we would be so angry with her and that the friend was a daughter of friends. And we told her, you know what? You're our daughter. We always support you. We may tell you that you were wrong, but we always support you. That's how I feel about Israel. I think that what's happening now, Netanyahu's government is the worst thing that ever happened to Israel in the last 75, 76 years. But my love of Israel has not diminished even one iota. And that's how we should really talk to our children, and that's what I try. I said, you know what, criticize until tomorrow. But don't disconnect yourself from Israel, okay? We criticize America, depends on the result of the elections. Half of this room now criticizes, and half of the room may criticize after November. But nobody's saying, okay, I'm leaving America. America is not a legitimate place. How come we can say the same things about Israel? I think this should be taken out of the discourse.
Passover story, fall of Jericho, trace the history of the fall of Jericho to the fall of the 1960s. And there was nobody there. And there was nobody there to talk. And they all were saying, how come I never learned this? Why don't I know this well enough? And why don't my children know this? And that's why their children don't understand this problem that we're having. And our kids don't speak about Israel with pride because they don't know. And all of you don't know that entire history, from Romans to Byzantines to Sadducees, I mean, like the entire thing. You don't have that somewhere, and you should learn it because it's part of our pride, part of our history. Kids don't know it, and they don't know to be prideful about what Israel is to do with people. And the timeline that I mentioned at the beginning of this is the only point that matters in this colonialist argument, because there's some Arab privilege that they get to pick the time that starts after Arabs existed, after Muslims existed, on the only land before they can.
So are you promoting a class of Jewish history?
Huh?
Should we teach a class here of Jewish history? No, that we will. I was thinking along these lines that if we want to combat it, we have to know. And that's why I don't know how many of you read the blurb that I sent yesterday in the email. I used the phrase, the rabbinic phrase, "Da ma tashiv la'apikores." Know how to answer the heretic. Don't throw them. You ask about the children. Don't kick them out of your house. Don't say, oh, you're a bad Jew. No. Learn, educate yourself so you'll be able to have a real discussion, a real debate with them. Now, what Brian said is true, but I believe it's only half of the story, because I wish we were only rational entities. We're also emotional. And I know that I was a different person when I was 20 than in mid-50s today, okay? And we can have all the arguments in the world, but there are some feelings, there is social pressure, there are many different things that are part of it. But the minimum that we can do is really to know where we come from and where we are going. Let me just end, it's late, with I started with what this Picard, this Cornell professor, said, how exhilarated he was hearing about the massacre of 1,200 Jews in Israel. And let me just show you that there are other voices that can even give us a hint of maybe there is some hope, because after Passover, we are supposed to focus not on the oppression, but on the hopeful times, right? So immediately after that, a Saudi prince, Turkey bin Faisal, let me quote what he said, okay? From Saudi Arabia. He said, I categorically condemn Hamas's targeting of civilians. I also, this is beautiful, condemn Hamas for giving the higher moral ground to the Israeli government that is universally shunned even by half of the Israeli public. He wrote it immediately after October 7th, right? That all of a sudden, Israel was the victim. And you just gave them the moral ground, he said to them. I condemn Hamas for sabotaging the attempt of Saudi Arabia to reach a peaceful resolution to the plight of the Palestinian people. Remember, one of the main reasons that Hamas did what he did was that they wanted to prevent an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I don't think that for the long run they were successful, but at least they did it for the short run. Okay, so this is what I was referring to as the difference between supporting the Palestinians, as he does, and condemning the actions of the terrorist groups among them. And I think we can hold all of that together. I don't know how, more people.
One of the things that drives me insane theoretically protest like Palestine. Why do they not stand up about God killed half Palestinians? They make no mention of that. They didn't protest. They don't give a damn. Why don't they care about other Muslims?
I'll give you the
Muslims killing. I haven't answered.
No, I'll be consistent with the argument. Oh, thank you. So Kenny asked why all these protesters that talk only about what the Israelis did to the Palestinians, but nobody mentioned the over 500,000 people who got killed in Syria. And let me just even sharpen it a little bit. In the entire conflict, the history of the conflict, let's learn our history. 120,000 Israelis and Palestinians or Arabs together got killed. It's a quarter of the number of the Syrians who got killed, okay? By the way, this is a good answer to those who talk about genocide. This is not genocide. More than that, in genocide, one of the definitions is that the population is decreasing. We, the Jewish people, still didn't reach the number we were in 1939. This is genocide, okay? All these years later, we didn't get to the number we were in 1931. The Palestinians' numbers keep growing, okay? So they cannot be a genocide. Now, I'm not saying that there are no bad things that happened there. I did say it and I will say, but far from any kind of genocide. So why is that? Because what I said, Israel are white who oppress the non-whites. The Syrians are all non-white, so they can do whatever they want. The Jews are privileged, prosperous, who oppress the poor, the miserable. The Syrians are all miserable, basically. Okay, so when you look at that way of thinking, in Syria, they're all victims. They're all victims, if you want, of the French, but I won't get to that. In Israel, there is a clear definition. You have the oppressors and the oppressed. The whites, the privileged, who oppress the non-whites, and so that's one answer, but not the only one.
I love your history lessons. I've been to many of them. I don't know a tenth of what you know.
You know, if you speak there, the people at the house will be able to hear, and since you schlepped all the way from your seat here.
Yeah. Been to many of what Ryan has said. But my question is, and why I'm so friggin' angry right now, is today, what's going on today? And after October 7th, we all had this beautiful little thing back here in the synagogue. And then what did you all do? What did we all do? And I read your thing that you sent out about that we need to understand and how to talk to them. But the reality is in my world, okay, and it also says, I think, I don't know much about the Bible. Somewhere there it says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. These people, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, they only know one thing in my world, okay? And maybe we've forgotten the Holocaust, but we better not ever, we always say never again. We've heard it here a million times. What are we doing? There's thousands of kids out there on the campuses, and we're sitting there letting them put up tents on our campuses, and we don't do a friggin' thing. Where are your voices? Where are our voices as Jews? As Americans? They shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. We just put it on TV. And yeah, the media is controlling it. We talked 5 years ago, a year before COVID, that we were talking about getting in support, Israel, demonstration, whatever you want to call it up here. Half the Jews in this country probably live in South Florida. They're watching in the media, they get all the media attention because they blow up buildings and they parade around, and now they've captured our youth. And what are you all doing? I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just as guilty. But if we don't get fired up and get angry and take some action the same way they're doing, we're just doing the same damn thing. And I'm sorry, I do not feel real badly for the Palestinian people because I don't think we felt real bad for the Germans when we bombed Hamburg. And how bad did we feel for the Japanese when we wiped out 200,000 of them to save 500,000 of our own? I don't know if any of you are angry, but I'm damn angry, okay? And if they show up down there in Boca, in my alma mater, I'll be down there. Just the way a few of them did at UCLA last night. And then they turned and ran because they're cowards. They're cowards. We need to do something as Jewish people, as American Jews, and as Americans. I have more Gentile friends that are angry about what's going on than I think a lot of us Jewish people. I'm done before you throw me out of here. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for your passion and actions. And that's exactly what we need to do. We need to express all the opinions and do it with respect by listening to each other. Do you want the last words? Just yell, use your court.
But I do want to say this. I think you're 100% right. You're really 100% right. It's exceptionally hard to find a path. My wife is a pure crazy person. To feel like I can take action, to take some stance to help, okay? And I've come to a couple of conclusions. One of them is that leadership counts. Leadership matters. And our national leadership matters. And having national leaders who support Israel and the relationship with Israel matters. And if you don't think that matters, you're out of your mind, because that controls a lot of the sentiment in America. The leader matters. So if you want leaders to matter, get involved in organizations that get leaders into power positions so they matter. There's a lot of them out there. Dan with us gets them on college campuses. APAC puts them into Congress. AJC gets them into international positions. But get involved in Jewish organizations it have an effect on the community so that those people in power push down pro-Israel sentiment. And the best thing that I'm doing right now is getting involved in races against Justice Democrat primary. So in fact, going against Justice Democrats, Cory Bush, you know, Ilhan Omar, or with Jamal Bowman. We've got about 5 races. We've got a great shot at getting some of them out on the primary. And if that happens, anti-Israel sentiment goes down because one voice is gone.
This is thank you. And I think that that would be a good way to conclude. I really want to thank you for coming. I hope that you learned something from it. And if you would like to share some other ways in which we can do something, enrich our knowledge of the situation, please let me know. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.